Now it's time for our next speaker, who's coming all the way from foggy Melbourne, I think it was. So Associate Professor Frances Batchelor. She's a Director of Clinical Gerontology and Principal Research Fellow at the National Ageing Research Institute in Melbourne. Frances is also the research lead for the Melbourne Ageing Research Collaboration. And as a research and clinical physiotherapist, she has over 30 years of experience in community, hospital, and aged care services, and she completed her PhD at the end of 2010 on falls prevention after stroke. But her current research expertise is really in healthy aging, health conditions associated with aging, health and the aged care system, as well as the role of technology in aging. The title of Frances's presentation is Fall Prevention as the Tip of the Iceberg, Rethinking Our Approach to Healthy Aging.
Thanks so much, Kim. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we are gathered, the Gadigal people of the NeuRA Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples here today, and welcome people also who are online. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this forum today. I feel like a bit of an imposter in a way, coming from Victoria. In the sense that I'm going to be talking about how we rethink our approach to healthy ageing, and lovely to hear Anne's talk, because I think our two talks are very complementary. But I'm going to be talking about policy, and I think just right from the very start, you've probably got it better here in New South Wales, because I think a lot of my perspective is from with a Victorian lens, and we need to do a hell of a lot more in Victoria. So if there's criticism of policy responses, it's not aimed at New South Wales, probably more at Victoria. And it was great to have John with the introductory talk talking about healthy ageing. So what do we mean by healthy ageing? We've actually had a whole history of different ageing paradigms and a lot of different terminology. So there has been a whole lot of talk around productive ageing, which sounds kind of offensive, I think, as if you're only useful if you're productive or working. Successful ageing, so what does that mean if you feel like you're a failure? How do we take that? We've heard terms such as active ageing and more recently adaptive ageing, which kind of has an appeal. But the term I probably prefer is ageing well, and John's term of optimal ageing is also, I think, something that we could really latch onto as well. But actually what is in most common use is the term healthy ageing, and it is a little bit misleading. We see it used over a number of different organisations across the world. We're currently in the United Nations Decade of Healthy Ageing, and the little symbol in the middle has the 4 circles, which represent combating ageism, creating age-friendly communities, providing integrated care, and ensuring the last one, ensuring access to long-term care if it is required. And older people are the central dot there placed in the middle. So we're right, the Decade of Healthy Ageing goes from 2021 to 2030, and we're right in the middle of that. But what do we actually mean by healthy ageing? So I'm not sure who's seen this particular image in the media. Sports Illustrated cover, bikini shoot with Martha Stewart, who is 81. So we get a lot of images about what potentially healthy ageing looks like, but this doesn't represent the true diversity of ageing, which is just, one of the least homogenous phases of our life is ageing. So this is also a picture of ageing, and what we like to say in terms of definition is that healthy ageing is not just the absence of disease. What it refers to is the process of developing and maintaining functional ability that enables us to experience well-being in older age. And it's about creating environments and opportunities that enable people, or us, to do and be what we value. And this is the critical aspect. It's around value for someone's life, for them personally, participation and doing those things that a person values. So that is fundamentally what I see and many others see the definition of healthy ageing. And I think we should continue to talk about that. And yes, the word health and healthy is a bit misleading, but yeah, promote that definition in its entirety. So at NARI, at the National Ageing Research Institute, we have had a long history of working in healthy ageing. Back in about 2010, I think, we developed a healthy ageing quiz which covered multi-dimensional aspects of healthy ageing. And we've recently updated this based on evidence. So we've looked at the various domains of healthy ageing, which are listed on the slide here. We've added some of the domains in that have emerged with the evidence, and we co-designed the healthy ageing quiz with and for older people. We've since validated the quiz and also done some testing on the test and retest reliability and found that it's both valid and reliable. And if you're interested in having a look at the quiz and the scoring, that's available on our website. And we're in the process of digitising it for use across mobile devices and tablets and so on. But obviously, and thanks Anne for talking about the COM-B model of behaviour change. So there are a number, when we're looking at healthy ageing and all those domains, what we're kind of saying is we want individuals to change their behaviour, to adopt more healthy behaviours. And so we can use some frameworks, and one of these is the COM-B model of behaviour change. There are others. And as Anne mentioned, it's around the capability, motivation and opportunity that then will create the environments or the circumstances for individuals to change their behaviour. But often what we've focused on as health professionals and researchers is probably the parts of the circle that are on the top kind of right, the top bit and around to the right. So it's on the capabilities and motivations and possibly less on those opportunities, particularly in the broader environmental and overall policy contexts and the social influences. And there's a lot of good work going on there, and I think Anne talked about that, of how they're really trying to tap into all of those elements to create behaviour change in physical activity. But what I wanted to do as the basis for this talk is give you some examples, successful and not so successful, where we've seen change at a population level, or maybe not so much change. So I'm going to start, and Anne mentioned this too, with tobacco smoking. So over the years we've seen significant reductions in smoking, both in the number of, or the proportion of people who are smoking, and also in the age distribution of people who are smoking. So younger people are smoking less, but there has been probably little improvement for people in the older age groups. And those figures have even been more striking over time. So what we've seen from sort of daily smoking rates of between 30 to 40% in 1980, so in the 80s, really reducing right down to that 11 and 12% that we're seeing now. And that's been a huge effort on a number of levels. And I'm going to show you just a little, I hope this one. This shows you some of the ways in which we've changed our attitudes. So contrast that with the messaging that we're receiving now. So our plain packaging and health warnings. And that was a real ad from the 1980s, and I remember seeing it at the movies, and it looked very glamorous, apart from the guy falling into the water. But yeah, this is a huge contrast to what we're seeing now, and we're seeing smoking rates declining. So we've seen population level change fueled by individual behaviour change. And this is an excellent, you can look it up, it's on the Cancer Council of Victoria website, a whole comprehensive review about what has been done around tobacco control. So you can see all the different approaches that have been taken into consideration, looking at, young age, so highlighting the life course approach that we need to have to healthy ageing, looking at images of smoking and tobacco use, and looking at how we can prevent uptake. So what we've seen really here with tobacco use is actions at every single level. We've seen policy change, we've seen financial disincentive, we made smoking way more expensive, we've made it harder to smoke in airports or in offices. At every level, there has been a concerted approach to reducing tobacco use. But of course, we're not done yet, because what we see is entrenched socio-economic disadvantage. So even in 2019, we have much higher rates in those with higher socio-economic disadvantage. And we've got some new challenges that we're coming up with, which is the use of vapes and e-cigarettes. So the work is not done yet, and policies are going to evolve to address the emerging issues. So the next area of health that I'd like to show you is around skin cancer. So since about the 1980s, here's a theme here, we're going back to the 80s, we've actually seen declining rates of skin cancer, all types of skin cancer across the years. But unfortunately, the rates of melanoma or the incidence have actually increased, and that's been fueled by the rates not coming down or actually increasing in those aged kind of 50 to 60 and over. So other types of skin cancer have reduced, and melanoma's reduced in younger people, but not for those 50 and 60. And what did we do in the 80s to look at skin cancer? Well, we had Sid the Seagull, whose motto everyone would probably know is slip, slop, slap. Was relaunched in 2010 with the addition of Seek and Slide. I don't know, that never 100% resonated with me. But where we see this, again, coming back to the COM-B model and looking at those quadrants of where we're having action, so the behaviour change that occurred in this instance is with parents getting their kids to wear hats, to put on sunscreen, to put their rashies on and so on. So the motivation has been very high because parents have high motivation to protect their children. But we've also seen subsequent actions happen at policy level too, and things like compulsory wearing of hats in schools and so on, covering arms in schools, and a whole range of different sort of policy levels at government level right down through local initiatives, and then the individual behaviour change predominantly driven by parents and leading that younger age group drop in incidence, not so much for older people. And you can see they haven't had the same response to those campaigns because of where they are in their life, but also because of aspects to do with that motivation and that sense of urgency about making a change to individual behaviour. So I don't need to talk too much about this because Anne has really outlined the physical activity and sedentary behaviour guidelines. And this is nothing new. We've been told to be active for the last however many years, and we know that we should be active at every single age. But has physical activity changed over time? So when we looked in the year 2000, the great report there, we found that there'd actually between 1997 and 1999 been an actual drop in the proportion of people who are undertaking sufficient activity. But sort of pleasingly, that we've seen in kind of the decade from 2007 to 2017, that the proportion of adults who did not meet the physical activity component of the guidelines had decreased slightly. That means there'd been a slight improvement in physical activity behaviour, but kind of not very much when you look at that graph, and it's not statistically significant. So despite all the research and all the trials about what we need to do, we haven't seen population-level behaviour change. And we've had a lot of initiatives. So from the 70s, we had Life Be In It, with Norm, who was a couch potato, encouraged to get out and about. Even back in the 70s and 80s, and it's not that easy to see, but as part of their poster, they even had someone doing balance activities. Very nice to see, but we haven't seen a change there either. And I nearly picked the same video as Anne showed. That is just highlighting what we all know, that again, we see some changes sometimes in different segments of the population, but often in the older population, we're still seeing high levels of insufficiently active adults. And let's see if this one works.
Perhaps it was the long sunny days, or a way for different cultures to connect. But the idea of getting out there and having a crack has always brought out the best in Australians. We became known as a great sporting nation. Then something changed. We became spectators instead of participants, so busy looking at our screens that we stopped looking after ourselves. It's not healthy. Right now, we need to start moving again as though our lives depend on it. Let's move our activity levels from barely there to bursting with life. Let's target at least 30 minutes of heart rate raising physical activity a day. Because if we don't move it, we'll lose it. Search Find Your 30.
So this was one campaign along with previous campaigns to try and encourage us to be more physically active. But there have been criticisms associated with a lot of the health promotion campaigns, in that if you are looking at that particular campaign, do you feel that you are spoken to? So it's been criticised as not being specific enough. It shows a range of different types of people doing physical activity, but because it shows that range, then maybe we don't feel like that it's specifically speaking to us. And what we know also from the Life Be In It campaign, which has been talked about as one of the most successful kind of health promotion campaigns in Australia, it increased the knowledge that people had that it was important to do physical activity and their intention, but it actually didn't show an increase in levels of physical activity. So whereas we need all segments to be covered, it's not just enough to have your evidence base and the interventions. It's not just enough to raise awareness, it's around driving policies and systemic change to make those changes happen at a population level. But sometimes things can happen really quickly. So in the pandemic, here's a Victorian picture. As soon as you couldn't do anything else or go anywhere and were restricted, like we were the lockdown champions of the world, restricted to 5Ks within your home, everyone was out in the parks. And Princes Park is within 5K from my home. I've never seen it so busy. Suddenly levels of physical activity were increasing. And again, in Sydney, had to use a Sydney example that was shown in Melbourne, saying, look at all those Sydney-siders way too close together. But I think it's the angle of the photo. You've got to keep that Melbourne-Sydney rivalry happening. So I think this is a good indication. I mean, the pandemic is not a good reason to have this, but change can happen if the situation is kind of warrants it, and if we have those conditions there that almost nudge us, which is another behavioural change term, but nudge us in the right direction of change. So the last example, and very relevant to this forum, is around fall prevention. So when I do talks to various groups around fall prevention, I often show this graph. Now, we know that approximately 30% of people will fall in any given year over the age of 65, and that will increase as we get older. And then I put this little bit down from where this data is from, and it's from 1981. So you can see a theme. It's the 80s back to the 80s again. And not only is this data old, but we know now that actually our rates are increasing. And this shows data from 2023 that our hospitalisations due to fall-related injury are actually increasing. There's a little gap in that graph just around change to the data collection method or reporting, I think. But you can see on the right-hand side that the rates kind of started going up, then they dropped in 2019-20. Wonder what happened there. People didn't go to hospital as much, which is why the rates are down there, and that it's increasing. So we know this is happening. And this is despite the overwhelming evidence that we have about what works to prevent falls. So we know exercise works in the community, we know the dosage, we know how often people should do it and what type of exercise they should do. And we have guidelines now, the recent World Guidelines for Falls Prevention. But I think one of the issues is that, let's see what I've got on the next slide, have to remember what you put together. One of the issues is, again, in this area of behaviour change, is that the interventions have focused on individuals changing their behaviour. And as I said, this is not meant to be a criticism of necessarily government policy, but how we as health professionals and researchers can actually build additional things in that will enhance behaviour change by thinking about environmental context, so everyone's unique circumstances. The social influences are very big drivers of behaviour change, and I don't think we give enough attention to those when we're providing our clients or when we're developing interventions, and you're excluded from that because you clearly are taking all those into consideration. But we're not seeing that translate to the next level of seeing it really scale up at a population level. Neither in Australia nor in other countries. And we are luckier than many other countries. Let's see if we can move on from this one, not sure. Yes, and so we are seeing, though, that we have some initiatives that I've also been involved in about trying to drive that policy change. We haven't seen broad-scale investment in programs like we have in tobacco or skin cancer. We haven't seen subsidised funding for exercise programs at a broader level, certainly not in Victoria. And, not those financial incentives that will lead to larger scale uptake of exercise for falls prevention. So it's good to see there's advocacy at changing that systemic response to this need. Technology. And I also have to criticise the work that I do, and I'm not immune from this at all. So when we updated our healthy ageing quiz with all the domains around healthy ageing, the feedback that we got from our participants who were co-designing the quiz was that, well, this is all well and good, but there are many, many factors that influence a person's health or our ability to age well. And often these are outside of our control. So this is a very salient reminder for all of us that we need to think about all of those aspects of health and that they're not only in our individual control. And so here is our disclaimer, I guess, at the start of our healthy ageing quiz, that each domain is not the be-all and end-all. And as seen with First Nations, we have impacts of systemic prejudice and discrimination and the impacts of colonisation affecting health. And so we need to think about that when we're working with people either in the context of delivering health care or in the context of research. So I think I'd like to kind of end this talk by talking about some things that we can do. So what I think we can do is address kind of the non-individual behaviour change factors by doing things like incorporating physical activity and exercise into everyday activity, by incorporating social connection as drivers to enhance the uptake of physical activity and exercise, by using incidental activity. And there's already a lot of work happening to try and really move that along, such as, you know, the LIFE program by Lindy Clemson, some of the work we've been doing looking at exercise parks for seniors and how you can use that by their location to nudge people to start exercising and to connect with each other. We need government action and policy at all levels of government, from, you know, federal right through to state and to local government. We all need to be activists around ageism. I think that's one of the reasons why Falls actually has not had a lot of money put into it compared to, say, transport accidents. Who falls over the most? Older women. Who gets injured? Older women. And who dies or has injury from transport accidents? It's predominantly younger men. So I do think it's incumbent upon all of us to be activists about ageism, to combat ageism. We need to have tailored interventions, so it's not the one-size-fits-all approach. We need to consider socio-economic disadvantage for all our clients and consider their circumstances. And so if you're like me and I'm looking at my individual motivation to exercise, I have easy access to a beautiful park where I can walk. It's pretty well lit even at night. It's a nice even surface. But if I live in the western suburbs of Melbourne, this is St Albans, which is one of the largest, also culturally and linguistically diverse suburbs in Melbourne, you can see the green spaces in this map, or lack thereof. And so if I'm prescribing exercise or wanting to enhance uptake, I have to think about that individual person and what their particular circumstances are. And that's where things like motivational interviewing, goal setting come into it, but we need to take another step and look at the systems and the systemic disadvantage and our response to that. And to work out and to consider all the aspects of this behaviour change wheel, from that individual physical and psychological capability and inherent motivation, but also those environmental contexts and the social influences, and especially the things that people are not able to easily change, and to find workarounds for those things. Thank you.
Thanks, Frances, for a wonderfully interesting talk. One realization from one of your last photographs was bringing back from your earlier slides, like the exercise parks, they should probably have a shade, shouldn't they, in our our society?
It's a funny thing. I was going to say, Kim, it's a funny thing because some of the councils where we've installed these exercise parks actually have regulations that say you cannot install a shade sail over the park. And so this is an example of how you would be limiting physical activity because of regulation at a local government level. And so we've been working with various councils to have that overturned. But it's, our environment, I didn't touch on this, but climate change is going to have a big impact on uptake in physical activity as our Earth heats up.
Yeah, well, thanks, Frances. That's indeed very important. We've got our Slido questions on there, and Anne is responding to the questions online. But we've got one slide or question that maybe, sorry, Frances, I'll ask you to come back up, that I'd like to ask Frances, and then we'll move on to the next session, or part of the session. But the question is, are statistics increasing due to the aging population? Like we know our people are getting older, they're not necessarily getting healthier, but what is driving that increasing rate of falls?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we look at the statistics, most of what we're presenting in terms of change is age standardised. So it's not necessarily because our population is ageing, but there's underlying increasing rates. So yeah, that is what we kind of speculated at some point, like it's because of the ageing of the population, but I think that data shows it's not necessarily that's driving it.
Thanks, Frances, and I think we should all become activists, and I feel very empowered after Frances's talk, so join me in thanking Frances.